How's it going, everyone? Thank you for tuning back in to the Cinema Retro podcast. I'm very excited about our guests today. We have Erin Gann and Patch Erin, two screenwriters and actors. I'm very much looking forward to hearing about their process in writing the film Birthright, which recently came out, and also hearing about some of their favorite films from the 60s and 70s, and also just hearing about their personal journeys as creatives. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us, Miles.
So fun.
So I guess we could start by, how did you guys first meet and become collaborators?
We met at Juilliard. We both went to Juilliard at the same time, and we're both kids from the Midwest, so we hit it off right away. And we kind of formed a bond. There were three of us. There was Michael Chernus, who was also there at the same time as us. And we actually got together and would write songs in Patch's basement. And so we had a band called the Greens.
We wrote a lot of songs.
Like 150 songs.
Something
like that.
At least.
Yeah, so that was actually, though, important to our writing process because we got to know each other as writers. Mm-hmm. And we got to know each other as, how to talk to each other about whether we like something or not.
Yeah, it's a great point. Like, being creative with friends is, being creative with anyone is, is a challenge because we want to put the ego in the project and say, okay, well, how do we talk to each other? And I think we developed that not even just the language, but the kind of sensitivity and understanding very early. And then we wrote a pilot.
Yeah.
Right after we graduated. It was like a half-hour comedy pilot. A lot of our stuff is kind of ambitious.
Yeah.
And we got some advice. We should write something in the horror genre, which we both really love as an audience.
What was the pilot about?
It was about a casting director.
Yeah.
It was called The Casting Couch. And then we realized, you couldn't really make that show now.
Right.
And then we got this advice to write something that's a little more producible that could be, shot for under $1 million and could be in the horror genre, which, seems to be a big appetite for. And so we had an idea and we thought, okay, well, what if there's this inciting incident of these children that go missing, and there's different theories about what actually happened there. And so we developed 3 scripts around that catalyst as an idea to pitch as a show called Coventry, which is where Birthright takes place.
And then what was your elevator pitch when you were writing Birthright?
I think ours was, when a pregnant woman is bequeathed a home from an estranged aunt, she and her girlfriend leave the city her partner to begin a new life, but they soon discover their place in the cursed history of the town, or something like that.
Exactly.
Or it threatens the life of their unborn child.
Right.
I mean, we were doing this the other night.
I know, we did this with you. It's always
Man, you really do work so hard. I think this is a really great exercise to hone that log line.
And then he said something where he's like, okay, the doctor comes out and says the baby was never there to this couple, that they were pregnant and the baby was never there in the first place. And that struck me. And I was like, and it was a real thing that happens, actually, which is crazy.
Pseudocyesis, I first heard about another great film based on a play, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Mike Nichols, incredible 3-hour black and white, Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, who were married when they made it.
Yeah.
And the young couple in that's a big reveal in that play and film, is that the young woman had this sort of false pregnancy. I always thought that was a really interesting thing, and we talked about it, and also the idea of like the tension of, is the main character to be trusted or not?
Right.
This is a woman who we learn in the first sequence, or the prologue, has had a breakdown, and we hear that she's been weaning off the medication. Is she a trustable main character? I think that's always kind of fun. And then also Ross and Jen, who you did that lovely interview with. I was out with our friend Michael Chernus at the Screen Actors Guild Awards, and it was Ross's birthday, and we all went out, and they were talking about this film that they were developing and they wanted to make. They wanted to do something in Jen's hometown, as she told you in that episode, and had a lot of infrastructure to support it. But, they were having some issues with the script, and he was telling me about it, and I thought, geez, that sounds like a lot of the same trinkets that we're going to need in our movie. And would you mind if I sent it to you? And they read it, and I think they called like 2 days later and were like, can we just do a handshake deal right now? We'll figure out the details.
Which was crazy.
When we get into it, but we were so under the gun to start with, as they mentioned, the strike was looming, and
so it's kind of like one of those things again where it's just like nobody's doing anything right now. Like
right.
And we were lucky enough that Patch just happened to be with Ross that night.
Yeah, and that
it was real.
They were poised to make a film, and it's a little bit like Weapons, where it's like, what if all these children just went missing and no one ever knew what happened and they never figured it out? And there's these different theories, and this would be the theory that this woman who was barren performed a birthing ritual in the woods with this demon, and she became pregnant, and then of course she didn't want to give the baby up, so she had her sister and her brother-in-law smuggle the baby away, and then of course the demon went crazy. And I think what we tried to infuse into the script was the sense of, you can't trust anyone.
I definitely think that came across.
Yeah, it's very Rosemary's Baby in that way. Once you get into the town and the people.
Yeah, we know something is afoot.
Yeah.
Before the characters do.
Could you talk a little bit about how the story of Rosemary's Baby inspired you here, and kind of some of the things you maybe borrowed from it, unconsciously or consciously?
I mean, that's one of my favorite films. I've seen it a bunch. Rosemary's Baby, it's not so much that you don't trust Mia Farrow, but she's a little skewed, you know what I mean? And so I think maybe there was something there that would maybe be a little less
the distrust that enters into their relationship with Cassavetes and Mia Farrow's characters is definitely something that we tried to get going between our two leads.
I think Mia Farrow's character is very innocent in Rosemary's Baby. She comes across as, like you said, Erin, a fish out of water, in the sense that she doesn't know about this whole behind-the-scenes satanic world that's happening. She's just kind of bright-eyed, she's happy, she's pregnant, she's looking forward to this new life with John Cassavetes, and she's not wise enough to know the dangers lurking around the corner.
Yeah, I think if I was going to make the comparison, a better word is just the fragility. That Mia Farrow definitely very physically fragile, but also maybe a little bit mentally fragile, and definitely Ren.
Ren is coming off of
very
a
mentally
history of perhaps seeing ghosts. And that's it was just a fun thing to play around with. Because it's definitely that John Cassavetes' character is, he sold his soul to the devil for fame, but that's not
which is totally reasonable, I think.
I think it's totally reasonable too.
Good bargain. I also think another thing that both movies have that I felt watching it was this kind of anxiety around pregnancy, and we want to give the kid a good life. We want them to be healthy, and so you're very vulnerable when you're in that stage where you and your partner are about to have a baby, and the horror genre can kind of exploit that anxiety a little bit and tune it up even further. What if not only are you worried about your kid being healthy, but you're worried about them being stolen by witches, or so I think that watching that, and it's interesting how these movies resonate in different periods, because I feel like now in my generation, people are having kids later in life. They're more anxious about it probably than even when Rosemary's Baby was made in 1968. And so there's young people have a lot of anxiety around pregnancy and the cost of childcare and everything. And these things are at the forefront of my generation's thinking. The creation of life and pregnancy gets at some things that science can't explain or can't understand, and that's why it's often perfect for kind of supernatural horror, because it reminds us of these forces that we don't fully understand. My favorite Rosemary's Baby story is, have you guys read Robert Evans's book, The Kid Stays in the Picture?
I was going to bring this up. That's so funny. I was like,
Really?
I want to talk about that. Yeah.
I've seen the movie.
Okay, yeah. So in the book, I read it recently. He has this great anecdote, and he's kind of listing his accomplishments as a producer over the years. And one of the ones that he touts is that Rosemary's Baby was, threatened to fall apart because Frank Sinatra, who was married to Mia Farrow at the time, wanted
I love that.
pull her out of the picture to be.
Listen, Evans, she's my wife.
Exactly, to be in The Detective. And Evans had to, do quick thinking to steal Mia Farrow back and make sure that she committed to Roman Polanski and Evans, and to see the picture through. And then, of course, Mia Farrow was served divorce papers on set of Rosemary's Baby by Frank Sinatra, and they divorced shortly after the movie. So it's just kind of one of those iconic, who knows if Evans kind of twisted the truth to make himself seem more like the hero, but it's one of those cool stories that if it's true, it's a pretty incredible story.
I don't know. It was also in the Sinatra biopic.
No.
They talked about that.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty.
And I mean, the facts of the case are that she became a star. She became a star, and that's irrefutable after that. After Rosemary's Baby,
she didn't need Frank anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And it seems like Frank was a little bit worried about that and wanted to kind of be, the domineering force of the relationship, and didn't want Mia to have that, I guess, power. Again, wasn't there, but that's the way that Evans tells it, at least.
I believe it.
At what point in the process have you finished kind of the story before you start shopping it around and trying to get it made? Like, do you write the script entirely and you're like, the movie's done, and then you try to get it made? Or is it, as you're writing, you're reaching out, you're getting an agent, you're trying to get in front of people? How does that process happen?
I mean, everyone has, speaking of entry points, everyone has their own point of entry. We're two actors. We've had careers in theater and television and film, and we are, but there's a lot. I mean, everyone's got a script.
Yeah.
And I think that if you're at a certain level and you've been established enough, you might be able to sell someone. I mean, people get
pitch,
not as much anymore, but people get studio deals or deals, first refusal with
got this idea and
different streamers and stuff. But for us, no. I mean, it's very much have the script. And have a really deep deck and a really
we made pitch decks. We made a whole visual. With the script polished. Right. We had gone through several drafts before we sent it to our agents, who would then give us notes when they took it out.
Yeah, or have friends read it and do some sit downs and read it. Sometimes I like to, I don't know if my wife likes it, but I like it. But I'll be like, let me sit down and just listen, and I'll read it. Let me just read it to you.
Yeah.
Because that can be fun too, because we know how we want to read it. But yeah, I mean, it's
we're constly reading it to each other.
And we would read it
read it again, make
often,
sure that but have it polished. I would say for my advice is for any beginning writer. To have it polished, have it be something wham bam, thank you ma'am. When they pick this up, it's like, oh, there's something.
Especially
you're
film,
on the page.
Especially in film. I think at television shows you can have the pilot. Some people want to write like the first 3. I think if you have the pilot and you have a really good Bible and deck and that will tell what's going to happen, because maybe people don't want to read that many, but also you're going to get so many notes on it anyway.
Yeah.
But for a film, I think you want that script and you want.
And don't take 7 years, unless it takes 7 years. But don't, set a deadline
and you have to have that causality between
Right.
each scene, so it doesn't just
Training the audience with that
so it
concept.
doesn't just feel like a continual. And then this happened, and then this happened, and then this
Right.
happened.
And everyone's always going to be trying. I mean, we've evolved because we see patterns, and you know, this script, obviously, as you pointed out with Rosemary's Baby and others, that you know, we're not reinventing the wheel here. So people are going to want to go, oh, I know what that is. And then you go, okay, yeah, but maybe it's something else, or maybe it's going to go over here, or maybe that person actually is a good person and this is the person you can't trust, and all those things that, you know, trying to just, you know, rewrite the same song, it's the same three chords, but they play a little differently.
No, yeah, that's super interesting. Um, it reminds me of La Samurai, Eric, which you said, Aaron, was what you said is one of your favorites.
I know. Yeah, I did. Melville. Yeah.
Yeah, and because I was watching this interview recently, it was Tarantino. I think he's a big fan of Melville, and he was talking about how John Pierre Melville's movies, they're basically, you know, like the gangster movies with Humphrey Bogart or Cagney from the 30s and 40s, but then they have this kind of genre twist, which is that they're set in Paris or Marseille. Or it reminds me of what you were just saying about, you know, you have this established genre where the audience is already invested because they like that story, but then what are you going to bring to it to reinvent it and to kind of give it a twist? I think
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. And I would go even a flash forward, because if you, not to bring up another movie, but Breathless, you know, if you think about those two movies, and the love that those people had, but they're for noir films, American noir films, but they're French, so there's an irony to it. So when you have Delon in the lead, you have this gorgeous guy who's a model, right? And yes, he's got the smolder, and yes, he's great. But yeah, they're in Paris. They're in post-war Paris, where they're trying to rebuild Paris, and they're acting like 40s and 50s noir people. There's a remove, I think, in you know, that brings this kind of ironic. It's not stated. It's not obvious, but there's a tension there, where you're like, okay, yeah, you guys are basically playing pretend. Yeah, there's a remove that I think is analytical and brings a kind of another dimension in La Samurai, particularly. Everything is so designed, you know, in La Samurai. La Samurai could be a fashion shoot for a fashion magazine, and it is. It has been, you know, totally referenced. So you get this very stylized, beautifully, that takes you as the viewer. You're attracted to it. You're seduced by it, you know. So you're seduced by this kind of weird remove.
Totally.
That's the only way I can put it. So it's a different thing. But if you look at, then you go to Quentin Tarantino and you think about the neo noirs or the post noirs of Quentin Tarantino. Reservoir Dogs is definitely that. It's a bunch of guys playing guns in a room. You know, the blood is fake. The did that gun really go off? You know what I mean? There's a whole theatricality to it, that it's not about that. There's something else going on here that still is illuminating to human nature, and you've kind of gotten to play pretend with that I really love, and I really enjoy that. Anyway.
Yeah, I think that's the appeal of genre to people, is that it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be like real life. It's stylized, it's consciously stylized to be
Yeah.
something else. And I think same thing goes for horror, is that you can play by different rules. Yeah, in that video, Tarantino called Melville the greatest reconstructionist of genre ever.
Right.
He's kind of taking the form that we know so well, Cagney or Bogart with the trench coat with the Homburg, and he's doing this spin where it's like, what if it was in Paris, and what if it was the 70s, and what if it had this totally different aesthetic, but it's plays by the logic of the movies is the same.
You still have a fedora, you know, like what? like what? Okay, I guess we're gonna wear a fedora.
I love that comment. It reminds me of this. this writer Roberto Aguirre Sacasa, who created Riverdale, and did he create Pretty Little Liars, or he adapted it? I don't know. He was definitely big on that. Incredible writer. Michael and I did a play of his early days called Golden Age. Anyway, he had another play called Based on a Totally True Story that was about him and his partner, and it was about him trying to get this horror movie produced, and there's all these phone calls with the Hollywood producer who's like, no, it's not scary enough. And he's like, the opening scene, what? The guy's in the ocean and there's a jellyfish. There should be 10,000 jellyfish. He's like, that's scary. You know?
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, but would there ever be? He's like, doesn't matter. You know, he was open with 10,000 jellyfish. Yeah. And I think about that, you know, like there's also, and I think this was actually an interesting thing that we were in negotiations with Ross, because Ross comes from the Duplass brothers and that mumblecore style, which is very hyper real. Everything's, you know, there's not a false muscle in there. And I think it's really a really cool way to approach a horror film, because and Rosemary's Baby, you could say, is that it's like everything seems kind of very pedestrian, you know, very everyday. And so that when it's like, no, there's a demon in the woods, it's like, we really have come to trust that person, that there is that they're just living a regular life, you know, and at the same time there's this operatic level of terror that is happening with witches and demons and unborn children.
Right, and that's the whole thing about the 60s and 70s too, is that, you know, the Cassavetes idea that we're going to just go down on the street and film.
And I guess he sort of invented it.
Well, and
the Duplass brothers really took it.
And Agnes Varda going down and filming real people, you know, and getting real people as a part of it, you know, and so you feel like you're in something real, you know, that there's, and that's kind of unnerving. It's like there's a real difference, I think, between 60s and 70s cinema, where 60s cinema has that realness going on, but they're still trying to pretend like they can live in the fantasy of a noir, you know?
That's interesting.
Yeah. If you look like I remember when I first saw Blair Witch.
Like found footage.
Yeah, the 70s to me felt like found footage.
Blair Witch is I think it has to be an influence for us too.
Yeah.
I mean, that movie, the way they built that lore was just incredible. I don't think you could ever say that another movie did that better.
Yeah.
And that was like right after we met, right? It was like, didn't that come out like right when we got to school? Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And one thing I wanted to ask you guys is you mentioned before weapons and some of the other kind of successes that we've seen in the horror genre. One of the things that we talk about on the podcast is that modern movies are beset by kind of two forces, which is streaming, obviously changed the landscape, and the franchise film era, where a lot of movies are remakes and reboots. But horror seems to be one of the few genres that's been able to kind of resist those, and you still get a lot of original, high concept, interesting horror movies in a time when a lot of the other genres, like let's say rom-coms or more mid-budget films, have kind of been reduced or whittled away. Why do you guys think that horror has been able to find, maybe it's evolved, but it's been able to find its footing in this new industry situation?
I think two reasons. I think one reason is because of maybe part of the primal thing that we were talking about. You can do it. I mean, Paranormal did it very simply. So you can get the desired result sometimes without a huge budget. And I think also, for whatever reason, we could all speculate that you don't necessarily need as big of names to sell the movie. I mean, there's certainly been wonderful rom-coms with actors that nobody knew. Once is a wonderful movie. But I think horror maybe, and especially because then you can be like, that's just that person. The other main reason I would say is Jason Blum. I think Jason Blum, he changed everything in movies. You know, and I'm not just saying that because he's hired me, but he, Jason, if you're listening, no, he really did, and he created a whole new model of producing, and that has bled into other areas where he's like, you get one. I mean, he came up, you know, he's pals with Ethan Hawke and all that whole crowd of amazing actors who were all coming up together, and you know, I think the first Purge was Ethan Hawke, and he's like, I'm going to get my buddy to do this movie. We're not going to have a big budget, but if it does well, we'll, you know, he's got a whole lot of points on the back end. And the points on the back end has, of course, always been a thing, but kind of backloading it in such a way, and just kind of being a run and gun thing. Yeah, so I would credit him big time with pushing the genre and creating the audience in this way too, that says, oh my God, these movies are great and they're really fun and they're really, you know, like not all young people are like you, Miles, and have this interest in films and interest in older films. A lot of young people I know are more just interested in you know, movies that are coming out now, and which, as you're sort of leading to, is a lot of these big franchises, remakes, and less risky. And also, I mean, if you look at IMDb, 10 years ago, it would be all American films. You look at it any day now, and it's films from all over the world. So the film industry and the whole world, of course, globalization, and that's where these horror movies, and this would be reason number 3, horror movies and big action films, they can play, and you don't need to necessarily speak English to understand them, and it's not a bunch of talking and reading subtitles. They can play to the whole world, and that is clearly where movies have already gone and will continue to go. I think Babel was the first movie that I was like, wow, they're doing a lot of subtitles and English. And I think, and then Parasite, of course, was, you know, not any English, but also the stage was set for that movie to come in and win Best Picture and be fully embraced by an American audience and considered one of the, I mean, the New York Times said it was the greatest movie of all time recently in their big poll, Parasite.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I wouldn't disagree. I mean, I might not necessarily say it's number 1, but it's definitely one of the best. And I think that horror and big action superhero movies can translate very well to that big market. And they're going to go, oh my God, you could make that movie for $1 million, and you don't know. Yeah. Perhaps it'll go and make, you know, $1 billion.
Yeah. I also think because everybody can agree on a horror movie. Everybody agrees on a horror movie.
Yeah, it's a little less.
We're so
it's
divided.
A little less subjective.
You see rom-coms being geared more and more, you know, towards women. You know what I mean?
Or more niche.
And it's all gone niche. You know, it's like with streaming and with all these things that you can get a guaranteed audience over here, and it doesn't have to be 70 million people. It can be just like, I got my guaranteed 5 million. We made this amount of money. I guaranteed that.
Yeah.
And it was because I targeted these people. I targeted these people. And with horror, you get a much bigger bang for your buck. You can do low budget, no actors, and as long as and high concept. Mm-hmm. And like I said, we were specifically kind of I can't remember if we were told or we had a conversation, but there was a conversation around ROI, around return on investment. Anyway.
Yeah, Patch, I like your point about globalization and the kind of effects that that's having on the stories that we're telling. There's probably a lot of good things to come from it, but if I would submit one negative side effect, and I'll put this question to you guys and see if you agree. But for me, I tend to like movies that show a particular place in time. You know, like I think of a lot of my favorite movies, Goodfellas. You know, Goodfellas is so clearly a product of there's a specific group of people. They're Italian. They live in these neighborhoods. They speak like this. They act like this. the almost anthropological angle of being a fly on the wall and seeing that stuff, I think is really interesting. And I think the risk of trying to market a movie to a mass market is you try to strip away the idiosyncrasy and the locality, and you try to make it, okay, how can we tell the story so that, you know, a kid in China can connect to it as much as a kid in New York City. And I think you lose something when you try that universality, because you lose the kind of the texture, the local idiosyncrasy, as I said, that makes movies so appealing to people, at least to me.
Yeah, I think there's, all of the great stories do some kind of magic trick where they pull the curtain back on a world. Like you think about Goodfellas, a lot of the Scorsese films, Breaking Bad, Succession. You know, like we're gonna see into a world that we don't really have access to, and we're gonna get to learn like, oh, this is how that works. I tend to think that if you're really specific and you're really telling a great story, that anyone will be interested in watching it, because it's, you know, someone trips and you feel it. You know, someone yawns and you yawn. We get hooked into someone else's story. We need it. You know, we need it desperately, because left to our own devices, we're all just going to, eat the dog food. It's like you got to put the pill in the dog food, and let people be reminded of their connection. And we're losing so much of that because of everyone's scrolling on their phone. That was another thing I was going to say is a factor now is what they call second screen. Well, like young people, they want to see stuff, but they kind of want to second screen it. They want to be able to look at their phone. And I think horror movies can sometimes be hard to look away from, and they can also be kind of like piercing, short, and sweet. And it's not like a 3-hour epic. It's not The Brutalist. It's there's no intermission. We're right into it, and it's if it's operating correctly, it's going to hit all those notes and keep people from checking Instagram.
And nothing wrong with The Brutalist. Like it's
well.
No, nothing wrong with The Brutalist. Nothing wrong.
Speaking of epics, there are the 3 hours that have intermissions. Lawrence of Arabia, Aaron, you listed as one of your favorites. It's probably it depending on the day, it's my favorite movie of all time.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I would say Goodfellas and Lawrence of Arabia are continually. And the first time I saw Lawrence of Arabia, I just was completely just transported to this world, and that's something that it requires something of you. You have to set your phone aside, like you said. You have to kind of give yourself over to this other world where they control your senses for multiple hours, and it is kind of a marathon of a film. But I think
how did you feel doing that? Just as from one generation to another, how did you? Because I think we're all curious about how you guys tear yourselves away from your phones and what happens during a 3-hour epic with an intermission like Lawrence of Arabia, where you're staring at, yes, a beautiful desert, but also complex politics.
I view it as good that it requires something of you. I think there's this whole trend of ambient TV, or ambient content, like something that's in the background. And I know people who they'll watch whole seasons and series of television while they're cooking or while they're doing something, and they kind of just have a voice in their ear while they're doing something. I cannot consume content that way. I find that almost schizophrenic in how you have to split your attention and your all that stuff. When I'm sitting down to watch a movie, I give myself over to the director, to it's almost like they're taking you in their hands, and you're saying, I'm going to give you 2.5 hours of my life, and I hope that this is worth it. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes you don't like the movie, or it's a shit movie. But you have to just it's a leap of faith to say, I'm going to entrust you with 2.5 hours of precious time of my life in the payoff that you'll give me an experience that is all-consuming and that is enlightening and that teaches me something that I didn't have before. And so it's a gamble, but I like taking that gamble, I guess.
Yeah, it's the participation. You really feel it in the theater because we all know we're sitting in a theater, and those people aren't really going through that, but we're all creating. We all take that leap of faith in our own imaginations. And I mean, film, very contrived.
Yeah.
It takes an hour to get a few seconds on a film, but we can suspend our disbelief, and it does require something. I love that.
It reminds me of what Scorsese said about Lawrence of Arabia, which he said is one of his favorite movies, but he said, it's one of my favorite movies and I can't tell you how it ends. Like, it seems to go on and on forever.
See, he fell asleep. He fell asleep, and this is my point. You put yourself in the hands of the director and you fall right asleep. It's a personal movie for me because back in New York, the Ziegfeld used to do double bills of those big 70 millimeter or whatever it was, and they did a double bill of Lawrence of Arabia back to back with Planet of the Apes, and so I would go and just watch Planet of the Apes and then Lawrence of Arabia, and it was amazing. It was just amazing to watch these two completely different movies from the same time, and how how different they were and how grand everything was that they were reaching for.
I think it justifies the existence of the 70 millimeter format. I mean, when you see the expanses of the desert and the way that it compresses those giant rock formations in Jordan and all of these things, there's no experience like that I've ever had with another movie.
No, it's really the cinematography in particular is just overwhelmingly, you can't put words to it. It's gorgeous.
Totally. Patch, to bring up a movie that you like, Deer Hunter, which is also epically long. I think it's 3 hours or something like that.
Something like that.
What did you like about that movie? Why did you list that as one of your favorites?
Like the opening of that, that feels to me like found footage when they're at the wedding. They're all these like friends. It's just very. I mean, you could say it's the biggest day of their life. They're getting married, but it's very natural, and it really pulls you right in, and I think it's so powerful because then it's like counterpoint. Now we're in the jungle and we're in this fucking cage. For those guys, just the psychological trauma that they go through. And I feel like no one does that better than De Niro. That and then you've got Chris Walken doing the who's your mom, who's your dad, and he can't remember. And I think that was the first time I can remember seeing a male actor just break like that in a movie, and I'll never forget it, and certainly made it part of my mission as an actor to be able to bring that kind of emotion and vulnerability, and you always try to inspire that with the writing too, and say, well, how can I write it in such a way that the actor has very little to do except be there and say the words, and it'll just happen for them.
It is kind of an actor's film in a way that it closes in on De Niro, and it closes in on Walken, and it's all in their face, these close-ups in their face, like in the scene with the Russian roulette where they're in the prison camp. It's all he's just kind of rolling the camera. There's not a lot of stylization or interference from the director. It's all just about these faces and how they can be emotive enough to carry us through the story. So I
mean, we were right there, and I mean, it's probably just on sticks and just rolling. I mean, Clint Eastwood does that. It's like there's no tricks here. I'm not trying to wow you with my drone shot or my crane shot. I'm just here, and we're just saying simple storytelling.
Yeah, I think one of the themes in the movie that was really interesting to me was that Mike, Robert De Niro's character, even from the opening scene, he's set apart from the rest of the people in his town. I rewatched it recently, and in the opening scene, they finish the night shift at the steel mill, and they're walking out, and De Niro sees these clouds, and he says, that's a good sign that we're going to have a good hunt. And John Cazale's character, who's like, Mike, you're always saying, wacky shit. Like where are you getting this stuff from? And I think even then, even in the first scene, this shows you the importance of good writing to set up certain themes and beats that later pay off. You see that he has this kind of presence of mind. He's almost like a wise shaman or like a mystic. He has this presence of mind that maybe allows him to escape the horrors of Vietnam that his peers don't have, and that's why they're kind of destroyed by the experience. And Mike has this distance that that allows him to survive, I guess.
That's interesting. I always looked at that more like he was the more thinker, sensitive one, and so he was actually the more vulnerable one to the experience. But you're right, he does survive. I think about that line, "This is this," and like, what does that mean? And I think part of what it is what I'm saying is like showing the normality of life. Like, here's normal life, and then you go and have this trauma of war, and then you're supposed to come back, and it's like the old Buddhist thing, first there is a mountain, then there is no mountain, then there is. And I feel like that was him trying to say, then there is. This is the same thing that it was before. But of course, it can never go back.
At the time of recording this, the recent news of Robert Redford's passing came to us. Definitely a hero of mine and someone whose movies always kind of reminded me of that golden age of the 60s and 70s that the podcast is really dedicated to, kind of that new Hollywood movement. You mentioned Patch as one of your movies, The Sting. Why do you list that as one of your favorites?
I just think that script is incredible, and it's like the real sting is on the audience. You know what I mean? And I'm always really attracted to that. It doesn't even matter what the genre is or what the subject matter is. I always appreciate the twist. But I always appreciate that, and I always appreciate that script. And maybe I was also thinking about Redford too, because I met him once at Sundance, and I was sat behind him for this showing, and I think I just stared at the back of his head the entire time. I was like, couldn't pay attention. But the one and only Broadway show I did was with Paul Newman, and and it was one of those things where it's like, maybe partly because of who they were, the movies took on this other aura. I remember at the end of we did the show, and then the crew of The Sopranos came and filmed the show. They ripped out the first 4 rows of the theater, and they built the stage out so the crew could have the cameras. And it was really interesting to watch Paul Newman go from his stage performance to his screen performance, for one thing, amongst many. But I remember it was his 76th birthday, and we'd all made this sort of like funny video for him, and he hugged me, and I had to sit down. I was just like, it was like a religious experience. I think those guys, they were also just regular guys and pranksters, and they also were like a new kind of Hollywood man, that they were smart, sensitive guys. Yes, they were super good looking, but they were soft in a way that they made cool and manly. And it wasn't, Brando, as we know now, was also very sensitive and soft in his own way too. But those guys were kind of taking that mantle and pushing it even further, and I always really appreciated that. Yeah, I think I'll always have a real soft spot for the movies they did together. But in terms of the writing of that movie, I just think it's insanely clever. And fun fact, Paul Newman always, before he films anything or even went on stage, he would put his face in a bowl of ice, like he does at the end of the film.
Yeah, in the scene.
That movie, he's like, I learned when I did that scene, I was like, oh, it really tightens up your face. So he does it, and and now maybe I do it too. I should have done it before the podcast. That's
funny. Yeah, I recently saw an interview with Paul Newman where he's talking about The Sting and how movies have kind of changed. It's many years, the interview's many years after the movie, and he was talking about how back in the day in those movies there was a sense of play that these directors and these actors would have that kind of went by the wayside later on in the industry in his mind, when things were more driven by focus groups and things were kind of directed by committees, and how are we going to get this audience and target this demographic and those kinds of things. He said you lost something on set when you had that, and which I thought was interesting, and maybe you guys have experienced some of that by working in the industry as well.
Play is the number one thing. I mean, the best sets I've ever been on are very alive and very playful, and there's a lot of just presence. Everyone's very present. I think there's a new trend I'm seeing, which I'm very on board for, is none of these on set. I mean, you can have it maybe at your chair, but even that, like, you know, it's something kind of depressing when you're sitting around with a, you know, a group of 8 actors and everybody's just on the phone the whole time.
Yeah.
You know, I remember auditioning for schools and realizing, oh, I'm much better if I'm just hanging out and talking and not just in my own world looking at my, you know, scene with other people. And then it's like, oh, I'm up. Okay, I'll be right back. We'll finish this conversation. You're already flowing, you know, you're present. And
there was one of the biggest lessons at Juilliard I learned was out in Brooklyn. I lived in Bed-Stuy, and I was filming myself, and I was like, I'm doing Hamlet, you know, and I was like, oh, to be or not to be, and I'm doing Hamlet, you know, and I'm like thinking this is gonna look great, you know, on camera, and I'm doing it, and a gunshot goes off outside, and I was like, holy shit, I'm in Brooklyn, holy shit, you know. I watched it back and I'm like, oh, God, the Hamlet just sucks. This is terrible. The minute that gunshot went off, I was enthralled. And it was me. I was like, oh my, that's real. That is real. And the thing is, what happened to me in that moment is what you're constantly trying to capture on film. You want a gunshot. You can understand why Sean Penn went on a set with a loaded gun to point at Christopher Walken, you know? This kind of trying to get at something real, like in a nature situation. So I can imagine that gets really tough with the amount of production design and the amount of people that have gotten in the way of, and not in the way, but are framing and trying to bring this thing to life. You know, talking about Deer Hunter, I think also the actors led the director, you know,
probably,
you know,
and they
used to let that happen, and I think that happens in the P.T. Anderson movie too.
I remember reading that Altman was talking about he always wants to be on location because when people are out and they're away from their families and they're with the other actors and they're watching the dailies and having dinners together, the work gets better because you can kind of forget your own life and you kind of can just be in your character's life, and other people only really know you as the character. And yeah, I think that can sometimes help too, especially with a movie where you're supposed to be transported to Vietnam or wherever. Yeah,
that was a really interesting story, Aaron, about the gunshot. Now that kind of brought out a more.
And it's not about my acting was terrible. I feel something real happened, you know. But it was a lesson at Juilliard where it's like, oh no, that's what I have to try and figure out, is like how to put that gunshot in the scene when I'm, you know, like how to not anticipate something, react, and do it with language that's not mine.
You know, Michael Caine talked about this, and this is something else I think about, and I also love that he says, I use this in my own life. Use the difficulty.
Yeah.
You know, if you're trying to get into a room and there's a chair there, you know, if it's a drama, smash it. If it's a comedy, trip over it. But use the difficulty. It's like, I try to think about that in my own life all the time. How can we use the difficulty?
Totally. And one other thing I want to ask you guys, or kind of posit to you guys about The Sting, was I was watching some clips of George Roy Hill, the director, and he was talking about the period aspect of the film, the fact that it's set in the Great Depression. And he said something that I thought was pretty interesting, which is that he didn't want to create the period, he wanted to create the movie period. And there's this kind of artificiality that his world has in The Sting, where you know that it's not the real 30s, it's the 30s that we see in the movies. He said that he emptied all the streets and he tried to make it look like a studio backlot. Yeah.
I heard that too, that he tried to make it look like an old
I
Hollywood
never
movie.
heard that.
Yeah.
Oh, it makes a lot of sense. It almost, dare I say, like is a little bit of a precursor to Woody Allen in this way,
Right.
where there's a little bit of an awareness of we're putting on a show. You know, it's crazy. It reminds me. Again, I played ball player number 2 and dead guy number 4 in this play. I had like a couple lines. My first line was "Yow!"
Brilliant.
That,
But I'm sure you killed that Yahoo. I mean, it was the best.
I let it rip, man. But
Just now.
the opening of the show was me and Paul Newman walking on the stage carrying this table together, and we were always like in the wings together. And I remember the day George Roy Hill died, and he was really upset. He obviously had no understudy. No one was going to be like, ladies and gentlemen, this evening's performance,
Played by Patch
Erin
Erin.
Gann will be playing the role of the stage manager.
Hello, everybody. Who?
But yeah, he was really upset, and I remember like you could see, you know, it was so dark back there, but you could always see his eyes because there was just like these piercing blue lasers, and he was just all choked up before we went on.
Oof.
Yeah.
But he used it, right? Like that's the thing. That's the thing about those actors and that the actor's studio and all of that.
And every role, every song a musician writes or plays, it's like there's always going to be some unique challenge, and you think you've got it, and you know, finding those keys in. I think if I possess any skill as a writer, it's dialogue. I feel like that to me feels very much like home turf. The other stuff I've really had to learn and read about and study and watch other films with that point of view and that eye to say, no, let me just listen to the script here and figure out, you know, structural things. We've talked about maybe wanting to write something that's out of that kind of 90, 100-page structure and more like, let's write a 2.5, 3-hour movie. How do you structure that? I know less about that. And we came up with a lot of great playwrights. The Juilliard doesn't have a playwriting program anymore, but we were the first class to have one.
Yeah.
And like, and like
Really
pretty
great
much
playwrights.
every playwright who went through that program, like you would know, or you would know what
is a
something they've
showrunner.
created.
Is it like on, you know,
Just an incredible,
huge
and
shows.
you know, we got to be front and center while they were learning, and then coming up in the theater where you're always developing new plays and being part of the writing process.
Yeah, we definitely piggybacked
you know,
off of what we learned from them.
They don't pay you, but they pay you in learning.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think that's everything on my end, guys, but it was so great talking to you guys. Really fast.
Yeah, this was fun, Miles. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, and I just love your passion, man. It's so cool.
Yeah,
It's really
that's
cool
fun.
to see.
Thank you.
Let's meet in real life sometime.
Yeah, let's hang out.
And I'd love to talk to you again on the next one.
Thank you guys so much for joining the podcast today. Super great to talk to you all. Check out Birthright, everyone. Please watch it streaming on Apple TV. And thanks for listening.